on to the main subject of today's podcast, Mike, and it's our second title winner that we're going to talk about here. Pep's already been covered. This time it is Jurgen Klopp, and you mentioned him last week, Mike, and you talked about the mind games aspect of it. You said that he's very, very good when his side are cantering to the title, but when there's a bit of pressure from other managers, the cracks start to show. There's obviously a number of reasons for that this season, injuries being one of them, and a common theme in the Premier League. They're not the only side to have suffered this, but something is not quite right with Klopp and Liverpool at the moment. And obviously we've heard about Klopp's personal circumstances, Mike, but can you put your finger on what might have gone awry?
I just think the emotional dam has broken a little bit. I think he creates this tidal wave of emotion where he's pushing literally everything along with him, not just the team, but the club as a whole. You know, the way the media gets behind them and all the things that surround Liverpool Football Club. Like, as a figurehead, Jurgen Klopp pushes everything along, and he's so demanding and relentless, and every little tiny sort of edge that can be got, he's after it. And I just think it can kind of have draining effects that when eventually you do kind of it is like hitting a brick wall. I go back to his time at Borussia Dortmund and the way it finished there. You know, like I say, it's just a tidal wave of emotion, but once it stops working, you know, it's like a whole system begins to fail, and you can look at individual things that are going wrong and pinpoint it's this or it's that. And I just think it's the whole collective now. It's kind of exhausted from what incredible standards they've set for 2 years. You know, I think they've overachieved in the sense that we know how good they've been as a team, but even an elite level team can still overachieve. And I think Liverpool maximised so much of what they were capable of last season that I think you just eventually reach a point where it's just you can't keep going at that level of intensity. And I think that's kind of what's happened to them. And, you know, you talk about injuries and things that have happened this season. You know, last season, there was virtually nothing went wrong. It was so flawless going into lockdown, you know, that literally nothing went wrong. It was almost like Klopp had a handle on absolutely everything. And this season, I think those little things coming into play is symptomatic of, you know, I think injuries sometimes go hand in hand with where a club is emotionally, where a dressing room is emotionally. You know, the more stretched you become, the more you make decisions on a pitch that might lead to injury and things like that. And I just think it's, you know, these things all feed into each other. And I just think they've hit that brick wall now.
Well, he's also shown signs and cracks, I guess, as well. You know, he's always been vocal on the touchline, but we've seen him fly off the handle at officials this season a bit more as well. A little bit prickly in some of the interviews as well when pressed on certain issues. His time at Borussia Dortmund, you mentioned there, ended, you know, somewhat unceremoniously. But do you see Liverpool bouncing back from this under Klopp? You know, has he got another gear?
It's an interesting one because I don't see them bouncing back this season. I think what happens is when you win a title, like they have done, the first signs of weakness that you show in a title defence, everybody wants a piece of you. Everybody wants their moment of glory against the defending champions. And we've seen, you know, last night, Everton, for the first time this century, have gone to Anfield and won a game. They smelt blood. They sensed an opportunity. You know, Liverpool are not in good form at the moment. They had those 2 games away at Tottenham and West Ham where they felt like, you know, oh, maybe there's something happening here and we can get back on track and we can revive our season. But then, you know, after that, they've come up against Manchester City and it's kind of all derailed again. And the problem we've got now is that, you know, it is a little bit emotionally, you know, you talk about the dam breaking or whatever, it's so hard now for Klopp to go round fixing individual things. If it's a big emotional problem that he's trying to deal with, you can't, it's like plugging holes on a sinking ship kind of thing. You know, it's going to be really difficult for him this season. What Liverpool need almost more than anything in the world right now is a rest. I just think they've, you know, that's where they're at. And I think the time to find out, I think this season could be turbulent for the remainder. I think everybody's going to want a piece of the experience of beating this Liverpool team. And I think it's just a matter of can they get top 4 this season? I think is a very big question mark around that now. But I think more than anything, they need a rest and they need a reset. And then, providing that Klopp doesn't, feel like, oh, I've taken this as far as I can between now and the summer, and he's ready for that reset in the summer, then yeah, I think they can go again. I think these things go in cycles, and I think Liverpool now are probably looking towards building for a new cycle.
Well, we'll see in the summer. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it feels like Liverpool have basically been playing consistently. Certainly Liverpool, some of the international players as well, have been playing consistently for about 2.5 years. So mentally, that is not going to sit well at this moment in time. Let's have a closer look, shall we, at Jurgen Klopp's skill set then, Mike. Now, he is very people-orientated in his approach. I know that one of his assistants described it in an interview as Klopp's approach as 30% tactics, 70% team building. He also looks to build that bedrock of trust and safety, and that's why some of the younger players have really stepped up. But what else does Jurgen Klopp have to offer?
Yeah, I think that's a very good summary in the sense of the 30% tactics, 70% team building. I think that's absolutely, he's all about the group dynamics. That's, a flow state for him. He's making sure it's about sacrifice. It's about everybody that's involved sacrifices for the cause, and it's about the cause. And I think there's only certain clubs that Jurgen Klopp can manage, and Liverpool was always the big attraction for him. He's an old romantic in that sense, and I've heard Rafa Honigstein talk about when he came over, there's only 1 or 2 jobs that he ever would have taken in England, and Liverpool was the one that seemed like the most attractive all along. Because he knew all along that he could build up this groundswell of support for a football club that had underachieved for 30 years or so, and that he could revive it. And once he got everybody on side, there was so much to get on side, and so much for everybody to buy into the history and stuff like that. And it was right up Klopp Street. It played right into his skill set. And I think what he demands of players and everybody is that you sacrifice everything for the cause, and the cause will protect you. It will look after you. It will, and I think this is kind of what we're seeing now is a situation where, players are making individual errors and things like that, and the collective isn't bailing them out. And I think this is where the little bit of confusion lies, because everybody is sacrificing themselves for the cause. Everybody's 100% committed. 90% of matches are playing out the way Liverpool want them to play. But the emotional fatigue, these little mistakes are creeping in. And Klopp, when it comes to tactics, doesn't necessarily have the answers. He has this one way of playing that buys into the energy, the emotional energy that he wants to create, of pressing teams into submission, of what he calls rock and roll football. It's just so almost impossible to contain. It feels unstoppable and irresistible when it's being done well. And when it's being done well for 90 minutes and not 85 minutes. But if it's, what we're seeing now is we're getting into the fine detail of, well, okay, why are things going wrong in this moment and this moment and this moment? And we don't necessarily have technical answers from Klopp. It's just, we've got to stop making individual errors, and the onus is on the individuals. And I think this is a little bit of what's going wrong right now. But that speaks to his managerial style, is why everything goes right and why it can seem so unstoppable, is that it's not just the quality of the players on the pitch. It's almost like there's a 12th, we talk about the 12th man, but it's almost like there's a 12th dynamic. He looks in a dressing room, he sees 11 players, and bigger than the 11 players is this kind of, the collective is like a 12th man within the dressing. And as long as everybody's needs are being met for the good of the collective, the whole will always be greater than the sum of its parts.
So this might seem like a daft question, Mike, but has the sort of, I guess, the fatigue of just life as well worn them down? No crowds for quite some time now at Anfield, and that winning run at home has recently ended. A city which is usually so vibrant, but most of which is closed down. Fans not able to get behind their team. That spirit that saw them, get a huge lift when Klopp came in, has just kind of dampened now with everything that's going on outside of football. Could that be having an effect, or am I sort of barking up the wrong tree?
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think if you'd have looked at the beginning of lockdown and just thought, right, empty stadiums, you were talking about the collective and everybody, the whole area buying into what it is and all feeling part of the same thing. This collective energy. Well, you take that away in a pandemic, absolutely. It is a big factor. I do believe so. And I think if you'd have tried to predict at the beginning of lockdown which clubs are going to suffer most, Liverpool would be somewhere very near the top of everybody's list of, the sterile nature of football right now. Who's it going to affect most? Liverpool have just got to be right near the top of your list.
Yeah, absolutely. And lots of players as well, such as Jordan Henderson, who kind of embody that, and players that the fans can really get behind. In terms of recruitment, Liverpool often linked with players sometimes years before they sign them. How important is recruitment to Jurgen Klopp then? Because I guess he's got to get players who really buy into this collective spirit. There's no half measures at this club, is there?
Yeah, I think what Liverpool have. I think Liverpool have got a fantastic fit. That the recruitment, I believe, the recruitment is done for Klopp, and that they've got a very sophisticated sort of analytics approach behind the scenes in terms of who they target, and the recruitment has been absolutely fantastic. That is where they have absolutely eclipsed Manchester City in recent years. They've got the recruitment so right so often over a sustained period now that's why they've been able to live with Manchester City and then eclipse Manchester City and set that unprecedented season last season. And that, I don't think necessarily if Klopp had the whole control, I think it would dilute what Klopp's all about. I think Klopp is just such a force of energy, such a force of, he's just got such an infectious personality that I think you can pretty much, not 100%, but for the most part, throw a collection of players at him that have all got a particular skill set, who can all fit the way he wants to play. We talk about this rock and roll football and this high intensity pressing. As long as those players have got the attributes, the fundamentals to be able to play, live up to the physical demands of what a Jurgen Klopp team asks and the way he approaches the game, then I think Klopp can virtually take any dressing room and have an impact on it and bring it together as a collective. And I think anybody that wasn't buying in would be sussed out straight away and wouldn't last 2 minutes, and I just think, but I think players who, there might be some players who necessarily aren't suited to it, but I think Klopp's such a force of nature that he can turn around players to buy into a collective where most managers wouldn't be able to do that to this particular individual. I think his threshold for the types of players he can get buying in is much greater than most managers.
Yeah, and I think most players would say as well that they would love to play for Jurgen Klopp as well, work under him. Now, I know that he has a set of ideals that I know he pins up on the dressing room. He used to when he first came in, that he wants all players to follow, and accountability, as we've mentioned, is a huge factor for Jurgen Klopp and his players. What will he sort of be doing now to try and turn things around? Or do you think he will take a different approach, Matt? Do you think he'll be saying, well, look, we might be out of the Premier League title race here now. We can still get top four, but look, here we go in the Champions League. We've beaten Leipzig and we take that into the next round, into the second leg. Do you think he's sort of more swayed by that competition now? Do you think Liverpool will put most of their eggs in that basket under Klopp, or do you think he will just be trying to maintain focus right across the board?
I think it's possibly too early in the season for them to prioritise, and to be thinking along those lines. I don't think Klopp will allow himself to entertain those thoughts yet, but I think it is a very real question that needs to be answered and will reach a natural point. I think if Liverpool can get back on track with the results in the Premier League, then the top four will be an absolute priority. But the further it goes and the more difficult, I think the problem for Liverpool right now is that even seemingly not necessarily ordinary games, but games are becoming an ordeal that shouldn't be an ordeal for them. Thinking back to the Burnley game, for example. The more the average Premier League game becomes an ordeal, the more tempting the Champions League becomes, the more you feel free and able to express yourself more in the Champions League. And the more you can dedicate that, we'll talk about 90 minutes of complete focus. I think it's easier I think it naturally becomes an easier thing for Liverpool to apply themselves mentally for 90 minutes without losing a concentration for a second in a Champions League knockout game than it does in the Premier League, where it just feels like You know, it's one hiding to nothing after another at the moment is how it feels, I would imagine, for those Liverpool players. So yeah, I think as the season progresses, I think the Champions League will become more and more of a temptation. We might see Liverpool's best performances between now and the end of the season will nearly all be in the Champions League. I think there's a big potential for that, yes.
So lots of young players, as we know, in the Liverpool squad, and some of them have stepped up superbly over the last 12 months. And you know, tribute must be paid to Klopp. There's other coaches who, of course, have had an impact, including, and let's just give him a mention, Blackpool boss Neil Critchley, who, of course, had a real impact on Trent Alexander-Arnold's career. But what's he like in terms of problem solving on an emotional level? So the player came up to him and said, you know, boss, I'm not feeling great this week. You know, those who may be having mental struggles, maybe struggling with the expectation as well of playing for Liverpool Football Club. We know his hugs are brilliant. We know he's always got a big smile on his face when he's talking to his players. So we naturally assume that he's got fantastic people skills when working with these younger players. Is that a myth, Mike, or are we absolutely spot on?
No, I think so. Yeah, I think he has got brilliant people skills. But the big caveat here is, you know, you're talking there about an individual level, players individually coming up to him with their individual problems. His priority will always be the collective. So it's always what's the best for the collective in any decision that he makes. And you know, it's obviously in the collective's interest. If one player's got a problem, you need to deal with that player's problem. You need to give him the support that he needs. And I don't think he'll desert anyone in that sense. But by the same token, I think he's also capable of some pretty brutal acts. And I think back to, what was it, probably 3 seasons ago, Dejan Lovren he threw him under the bus after a defeat at Tottenham. And it was literally, we talk about sacrifice. And I think deep down he knew that Lovren could take it. You know, that Lovren's come out and talked about himself as being one of the best players in the world. And, you know, he's clearly not short of confidence. So Klopp probably understood that he could handle it, but he threw him under the bus for that performance. And what it was like, he's a sacrificial lamb. We're going to put this 4-1 defeat against Tottenham all on his shoulders because it protects the other 10 players and the substitutes and everyone else who was involved can be completely absolved, because that helps the collective to just have one player, throw one player under the bus, and it protects the collective. And he's capable of acts like that as well. But that's emotional impact. That's understanding the emotions of your own dressing room, understanding what is going to have the best long-term result on the whole, as opposed to, and if that means, you know, not really catering to the needs of what one individual probably needs right now, then he's capable of doing that, because his focus will always be the collective.
Would he delegate then in that case? Would he say, right, this player's struggling, we've got an issue here, that maybe there's an attitude problem or there's something not quite right. I'll take this player out of the firing line right now. I'll let someone else deal with that, and I'll focus on keeping level heads in the changing rooms.
Quite possibly. I think we can safely say that the support network around him, you know, I think he builds a support network that even if it's not his problem to deal with, he'll have put a lot of time and effort and thought into who his backroom team is, who he's surrounded by, and what their skills are. He will understand, you know, how to get people's emotional needs met by the people in place around him. So it might not be necessarily him that deals with one player's particular problem, but it's fair to say a lot of thought goes into all of those kinds of considerations. You know, 70% team building, 30% tactical. You know, his backroom staff is as much about that support network as it is about the analytics side. But I think it's also important that, you know, the analytics, the tactical, the video analysis, and all of those types of departments, they've got a big job to do as well, because his skill set isn't tactics, and that quality of knowledge and wisdom and information needs to come from somewhere. I think if it was Klopp left to his own devices without the right people in place to feed him the right tactical information, and then I think we'd see more of a weaker side of Klopp. But, you know, I think it's fair to say that Liverpool have pretty much got it, you know, sorted in most departments behind the scenes, that it's a very slick operation.
Yeah, well, their skill sets complement one another perfectly. Certainly that was on display last season. So obviously Jurgen Klopp, Premier League winner, Champions League winner, great success as well in the Bundesliga. We shouldn't forget that. But we're talking sort of more Liverpool now, Mike. Where does he rank in terms of Premier League managers then? He's got a title under his belt, first and foremost. Does he have to sustain it for a bit longer in order to sort of go down as one of the best managers of this era?
I would say so, yes, because, sustainability is the big thing. Sir Alex Ferguson will always be the benchmark because of how many different cycles, and how many different times he did it. I think what we can say about, Jurgen Klopp at his best, when the last 18 months has been a period of football from Liverpool that has been as good as anything that the Premier League has seen, in terms of relentlessness and intensity and ability to generate points. But what I would say is we're going to get to see the other side now. My personal suspicion is that Klopp isn't quite of the very, very highest level, but he's not far behind. I think we can see his relationship with Pep Guardiola and the fact that his admiration for Pep Guardiola is possibly, I think a manager like Jurgen Klopp needs a target, needs a standard to be set by someone else to get the very best out of him. And I think it's almost like potentially come the end of his career will be defined by his relationship. And it's like the Messi-Ronaldo thing a little bit, that Ronaldo needed Messi almost to get to a level that Ronaldo might not have hit if it wasn't for Messi setting those standards for him to attain. And I think it's possibly a similar relationship with Klopp and Guardiola, that Guardiola sets a standard and Jurgen Klopp can drive and push so hard that he can match that standard himself, if not necessarily indefinitely, for what has now been 18 months, 2 years, is an incredible standard. So yeah, he's certainly very, very high up there. We're going to find out now is, how the rest of the season plays out, how the summer plays out, and does he stick around? If it feels like everything around you is broken, you have to start again. Can he stick around and do it all over again? Then we'll get to see next season and beyond just where he belongs, in that kind of pantheon of greats.
Final question on Klopp then, going off what you said there, he's close to being a great, and Pep Guardiola obviously pushing him along every step of the way. 70% team building, 30% tactics. Do you think those two numbers need to just budge a little bit closer in order for him to become one of the greats, or do you think he can do it sort of with those percentages in place?
I don't think he can change those numbers. I don't think he's equipped to be more, tactically speaking. I don't think necessarily there's any more. He's got this one system and way of playing. I don't think that's ever really going to change. I don't think he can reinvent himself or reinvent the game in any way. I just think it's all about this groundswell of emotion and pushing things forward. And I think, he's of the very, very highest caliber when he's on top of everything. I just think it's impossible to kind of almost play God indefinitely and have a handle on so many different things and be pushing so many different people's emotions along, indefinitely. I just think there'll always be a point where the draining effects of that kick in. And, I like I say, it's can he do it again? Can he do it once? It kind of hit the brick wall. Can you do it again? This is the big question for Klopp for me.
Well, if you'd like to use manager profiling and everything that Mike has said in your betting to improve the way you approach it, then you can, of course, get a free case study, can't you, Mike?
Yeah. There's a video on the Foxpunter website. You just need to opt in. Click on the link below, and it basically will explain how manager profiling works and the different ways that it can be used as a strategy for identifying patterns of team behaviour. And because nowadays data science is sort of all-consuming in football betting, it's so hard to judge teams on relative team strength because computers are out there doing that, to a level that most humans can't. But by understanding patterns of team behaviour, you can begin to see the game in new ways and identify value in that sense. So there's a full case study that kind of explains how it works.